Am I the asshole for refusing to lend my friend my house for her wedding after she asked me for a paternity test, resulting in her having to cancel the wedding? My friend Sandra and I have known each other for over 20 years. We are 30 to 32. Sandra is getting married to Andres and I am married to Ian. Some relevant information. Andres and I originally come from the same country and even the same region. We share many characteristics. We both have very round faces, deep brown eyes, long straight black hair, etc. If you didn't know better, you might assume we are siblings. I met Andres 6 years ago and introduced him to Sandra. He proposed 2 years ago. I own a beautiful property in my home country that I was ready to lend to Sandra and Andres for their wedding. My property is like a finca and has 10 rooms. Usually I would rent it out for weddings at a somewhat high price, but I was happy to give it to them at no cost, with the condition that they hire their own catering and have their guests strip their beds when they leave. The issue. 3 months ago, Sandra became more reclusive. She wouldn't answer my texts and we didn't meet up. 2 weeks ago, she appeared at my door with Andres. They sat us down, my husband included, and said she suspected that my daughter is actually Andres' biological daughter and requested a paternity test for peace of mind. I was so shocked that I couldn't say anything. My husband lost his temper and raised his voice, telling Sandra that she was being absolutely stupid. Sandra pointed out that my daughter looks like Andres. I explained that Andres and I look alike. She kept shaking her head, saying my daughter would look more like my husband and not like my exact copy. The evening ended poorly. I agreed to the test if they paid for it. The results came back last Friday, showing that Andres was not the father. We also did a test confirming that my husband is the father. Sandra cried and tried to hug me. I told her I didn't want to and that I didn't want to be friends with her for the time being. She kept saying her worries were justified and made a comment about women from your country being more likely to do that. In that moment, I was filled with anger. I told her she could forget about using the venue and that I didn't want her in my life anymore. She started crying, but I made her leave. Her mom and she have been texting me saying they can't find a new venue. I still said no. 20 minutes ago, Sandra called me sobbing, saying that the wedding is off because of me. Am I the asshole? Should I have let her use the venue at the usual price, or was what I did okay? Edit. Andres was not chill about this. He seemed exasperated. He was quite upset and basically just agreed to this so she would drop it. I didn't include it because I did not see the relevance for the conflict between me and her. Date. They are no longer together. Sandra just wrote me an email apologizing and, for some reason, PayPal'd me €25.67. Anyway, thank you for weighing in.
Am I the asshole for admitting in front of all of my husband's friends that I've never had an orgasm? Recently was my husband's friend's birthday party. It was a bigger party and all my husband's friends and their wives were there. No kids. One woman that I'm friendly with was annoyed with her husband and joked, "Men. If they didn't get us off, why would we keep them?" And she laughed. I awkwardly laughed but I guess looked uncomfortable. She asked me what was up, and she pointed out that I made a weird face. I said, "I've just never had an orgasm before, so I guess I couldn't relate." Almost a dozen people looked at me when I said that. It was super awkward. The wife then awkwardly asked, "Is everything okay down there?" And I said, "Yeah, just have never had anyone try, I guess." For the next 10 minutes, all my husband's friends took turns insulting him in various ways. Many women talked about how they'd never be married to someone who didn't get the job done. My husband made us leave early. When we got home, he lectured me about how I humiliated him. I pointed out that she asked, and I have a tendency to be honest. He's been really upset the last several days, and he keeps saying he can't talk to his friends because they now think badly of him. Am I the asshole for being honest here? Edit. I've brought the issue up countless times in the past. He tells me that it's not important / not a big deal that he doesn't get me off. Since it's not that important, I just don't see why I have to hide it like some kind of dirty secret.
Am I the asshole for robbing my wife's affair partner, which has now led to his divorce? I, 32M, have been married to my soon-to-be ex-wife, 30F, Madison, for 4 years. When we first got married, everything seemed perfect. We were that couple that everyone looked up to, or so I thought. But over time, like in any marriage, we had our ups and downs. Recently, though, things have spiraled beyond repair. About a year ago, I found out she was having an affair. It wasn't through some sneaky private investigator or anonymous tip-off, it was far more gut-wrenching than that. I had been on a business trip, and I decided to come home early to surprise Madison. I even picked up her favorite wine and flowers on the way home, hoping to surprise her with a romantic evening. But when I walked through the front door, what I found was not the warm, loving welcome I expected. Instead, I was greeted by the sight of unfamiliar clothes strewn across our living room floor. My stomach dropped, but a part of me still hoped for a reasonable explanation. Maybe we had guests over? Maybe a friend needed a place to crash? But then I heard the unmistakable sounds of passion coming from our bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly walked towards the source, each step feeling like 1,000 miles. When I reached the door, it was ajar, and I could see everything. There she was, with another man, completely oblivious to my presence. I could feel the rage building up inside me, like a volcano ready to erupt. I was furious, devastated, and utterly betrayed. My initial instinct was to grab my cricket bat from the front closet and teach them both a lesson they'd never forget. I wanted to smash everything in sight, to make them feel a fraction of the pain that was tearing me apart inside. But as my hand hovered over the handle of the bat, I paused. I thought about the consequences, about what would happen if I let my anger take control. I didn't want to end up in jail, I knew that wouldn't solve anything and would only ruin my life further. So instead, I took a deep breath and decided on a different approach. I walked out of the house quietly, without them even noticing I had been there. I gathered up all their clothes from the living room and threw them in the trunk of my car. I didn't want to destroy anything in the house, so I drove to the nearest McDonald's and dumped all their clothes in a garbage can. It felt like a small, petty victory, but it was better than losing my temper completely. I then went to my friend's house, where I turned off my phone and proceeded to get absolutely shit-faced. My buddy was more than willing to help me drown my sorrows in alcohol, and we spent the night drinking until we could barely stand. His wife, bless her heart, hosed us off the next morning when we woke up on their lawn, still reeking of booze. When I finally turned my phone back on, I was bombarded with dozens of missed calls and texts from Madison. The messages followed a predictable pattern. At first, she was scared and concerned, asking where I was and why I hadn't told her I was coming home early. Then, when she realized the house had been broken into and their clothes were missing, she became frantic, accusing me of all sorts of things. Finally, when she pieced it together and realized what had happened, her texts grew increasingly angry and desperate. She was furious that I had taken their clothes and disappeared without a word. What Madison didn't realize at the time was the chain reaction my actions had set off. The guy she was with, let's call him Jason, was significantly smaller than me, about 5 inches shorter and at least 60 pounds lighter. When he found out his clothes were missing, he had no choice but to call a friend to bring him some spare clothes and his spare car keys. Unfortunately for him, his wife smelled something fishy and decided to follow the friend back to my house. When she arrived, she saw Jason leaving in clothes that were clearly way too big for him. Suspicions aroused, she confronted him and eventually managed to get the truth out. She even took pictures of him in the oversized clothes as evidence. This revelation turned out to be a game changer in their marriage. Jason's wife had been suspicious for a while, and now she had solid proof of his infidelity. Their prenup, which heavily favored Jason in case of a divorce, was rendered void due to the infidelity clause. This cost Jason a lot of money and, ultimately, his marriage. What started as an affair and a pile of missing clothes turned into a giant, chaotic mess, leaving Jason to deal with the fallout. For a while, Madison convinced me to try and forgive her. She apologized profusely, swore it had been a mistake, and begged for another chance. She suggested counseling, and I reluctantly agreed. I loved her, despite everything, and a part of me wanted to believe that we could somehow work through this. So we started going to counseling sessions, and for a time, it seemed like we were making progress. We talked about our issues, about what led her to cheat, and about how we could rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But the more we talked, the more I realized that something was still off. Madison was increasingly defensive, and during one session, the topic of that night came up. She mentioned, almost offhandedly, that I was wrong to steal Jason's wallet, phone, and car keys. I was taken aback. First of all, I hadn't even admitted to taking his stuff, though it was true that in my anger, I had taken his wallet, phone, and keys as a way to mess with him. I figured that by the time he noticed, it would be too late for him to retrieve them without getting into an awkward situation. But for her to bring it up as if I was the one who had done something wrong, that was a slap in the face. She continued, saying that Jason's divorce was costing him a lot of money and that I should have dealt with it in a more mature manner. She even implied that I was to blame for the entire situation. That was the final straw for me. Here she was, the one who had cheated, who had brought this entire disaster upon both our lives, and she was blaming me for the consequences of her actions. It was infuriating, and I realized then that there was no saving our marriage. Her betrayal had already destroyed what we had, and her refusal to take responsibility for it was the nail in the coffin. That night, I made the decision to file for divorce. I moved out of our home and into my own apartment. I didn't care anymore about what she thought, about keeping the peace, or about trying to work things out. I was done. I had tried to be the bigger person, to forgive, and to move on, but her attitude made it clear that she didn't value our marriage the way I did. Now, as I sit in my apartment, waiting for the divorce proceedings to finalize, I can't help but feel a mix of emotions. There's a sense of loss, of course. Madison and I had shared so much, and it's hard to let go of the good memories. But there's also a sense of relief. I'm no longer living in a house of lies, no longer pretending that everything is okay when it's clearly not. In the end, I know that Madison and Jason are responsible for their own actions. I didn't make them cheat, and I didn't force Jason's wife to file for divorce. They brought this on themselves, and now they're dealing with the consequences. If anything, I hope Jason's ex-wife gets everything she deserves out of the divorce settlement. As for Madison, I wish her the best, but I'm moving on with my life. I deserve better than to be blamed for someone else's mistakes. So, am I the asshole? Some people might say I went too far by taking Jason's things and inadvertently exposing his affair, but I don't think so. I was pushed to the edge, and I reacted in a way that was far less destructive than it could have been. At the end of the day, the truth came out, and now everyone involved is dealing with the fallout. And honestly, I don't regret it one bit.